Hello. Hello, everyone. Common Sense Academy here today, live and at your pleasure. Let me know what it is you would like to discuss, where you're coming from, what your legal questions are. If you want to talk about auditors, frauditors, or maybe even sovereign citizens, the new clip of King of the Hill where Dale quoted Admiralty Law. Who knew cartoons were also sovereign citizens? I sure didn't. I'm here to talk about whatever it is you want to talk about. You got a legal question, a legal concern. You want to chat about the Constitution. You want to chat about freedom of speech. Whatever it is that you want to talk about, I am here. Joe Pometto, Joe the Lawyer, Common Sense Academy. Want to talk about updates on the show. Not too much to say. I've been trying to put out more content. I've been finding a lot of newer stuff. So, any sovereign citizen stuff that pops up, I've sort of found my sources. I got a stream of things coming in. Haven't checked my email recently. I need to. Hi, Kelly. Thank you for coming in, being my moderator. Have you sent me an email recently? I haven't checked. Gary, how you doing? Good evening. Barbecue Bob, thanks for coming in. It's a cold one in Pittsburgh. Well, not that cold. Ayase, thank you for joining me. Glad to see you made it to one of my live chats. I've seen a lot of your comments. I appreciate you watching and dropping comments for me. Bob Job, Linda Hart, how you doing? I don't know, Bob Job. I don't know if we know each other. Wide sauce sits don't have a lick of common sense, but delusional thoughts abound. I think there are 3 video games that had sovereign sits. Are you serious? I love it. Nathan, if you know what they are, shoot them to me. I would love to look into those and find some scenes. I mean, it would absolutely make me laugh my face off. The Dale scene killed me, especially when the judge had him bound and gagged, and he swallows the cigarette. King of the Hill was popular for a long time, but I think it was underrated. And I understand, it had its run. But looking back, in a lot of ways, it was funnier than like Family Guy. It was just so dry. I like Family Guy too. And I love South Park. Okay. South Park makes me laugh my face off. Hey, K Jackson, another fellow Pittsburgher. Thanks for joining us. Do you know where all the maritime law stuff comes from? I looked into it before, Wasser. I can't remember it. They claim I that's one that I can't claim. John, another Pittsburgher. Thanks for coming. Thank you for hopping in, everybody. I appreciate you being here. Let's look up sovereign citizen maritime admiralty. There's a lot out there on sovereign citizens. I'm thinking of writing like a 20, 30 page ebook. Me and Kelly may work on this together. The Admiralty Law stuff is just hilarious. I'll tell you a little Admiralty sovereign citizens. I'll tell you a little bit about Admiralty Law. Admiralty maritime. It's not on their Wikipedia page. I'm surprised. I would have thought, okay, here's okay, the contemporary sovereign belief system is based on a decades-old conspiracy theory. At some point in history, sovereigns believed the American government set up by the founding fathers with the legal system the sovereigns referred to as common law was secretly replaced by a new government based on admiralty law, the law of the sea and international commerce. Under common law, the sovereigns would be free men. Under admiralty law, they are slaves. And secret government forces have a vested interest in keeping them that way. So that's one of the things that they do, is they claim that the court is an admiralty law, therefore an admiralty court, therefore it doesn't have jurisdiction over them. It's sort of similar to the UCC claim as well, where they start to cite the UCC. They think the UCC has usurped like original constitutional and common law, but they believe that there are holes in the UCC that they can still exploit for their reasons. King of the Hill was by the creator of Beavis and Butthead. The animation's very similar. I liked Beavis and Butthead. I'm a part of that generation, maybe a little younger, but I was watching them. Yeah, I mean, the animation is almost just the same. Thanks for joining, John. Thank you for joining. Is there a law that cites public space as not a public forum? Not all public spaces are public forums. Okay, that's my understanding, and this is from me studying the First Amendment back in law school. But certain public spaces are public forums. For instance, certain spaces historically, and therefore they're now constitutionally protected, have been used for things like protests, or, you know, a place for someone to go and make a speech about a movement, such as, you know, the area right outside of a city hall, certain parks, certain public spaces. Okay. But not all public spaces are automatically open as public forums when it comes to free speech. What's the biggest thing that annoys you about sov sits and mores, at least besides the stupidity of it? You know, it's the cherry picking. It's the cherry picking. It's that they cite the laws that they want to apply, and not the ones that they don't want to apply. Honestly, I think a lot of it is hysterical, but it can also be dangerous. And so in that sense, Linda, I don't know. I'll give you the truth. I actually, you know, when the police are pulling someone over and they're saying, I don't consent, look, you shouldn't consent to the police. So during, you know, you got to comply with the police, but you don't have to consent. Some of the stuff they pull in court, and maybe this is because I'm a lawyer talking, okay, some of the stuff they pull in court, that's what annoys me, okay, because that's your chance to argue the law. That's the chance to put on your case. And when you're in there not talking about the law, not talking about the case, you're only digging your hole further and further. One of the recent Red Dead games, and somewhere in GTA, there's a sovereign citizen. I'm gonna look that up. I'm gonna look it up. Red Dead sovereign GTA sovereign. Country blows the police instead of helping people. They just want to jam people up. Okay. The only kind of common law I've only ever seen come up in court is common law marriage. Well, I mean, that's actually like the common law is applied all the time, Gary. It's literally applied all the time. In our interpretation of much of the statutory law, in the law of torts, in tort law, like negligence, a lot of that is not regulated by statute. It's actually all common law. Common law has the force of law. I just can't abide ignorance and delusional people, which makes up most of the sov sit. Yeah, Gary, I'm in the same boat. It's just face reality, you know, get in here, talk some sense, and you could come away with a much better result than you do. Form would be the Trump Twitter opinion. Well, the interesting thing, you know, Wasser, the Trump Twitter opinion, you know, that was interesting because there were going to be constitutional challenges to that. I can't remember if the Supreme Court made a decision. I think they did, where they basically said that because the president began using that forum, it became a public forum. And I think this is an argument that was made. So therefore, if Twitter banned the president, they could potentially be violating the First Amendment, and that would be almost unspoken of when it comes to a private organization regulating speech within it or within its own publication. Casey Anthony. Yeah, the government's required to, you have to provide public forums, but you don't have to give unfettered access to places to protest and or exercise speech. I remember them having special areas of sidewalk for protesting when I went down to watch the Casey Anthony case. Gary, you went down to watch the Casey Anthony case? That's interesting. If you want to call in and talk about it, let me know. I got my phone here. If anybody wants to call in and have a discussion, 412-593-4529. If you want to appear on the show, I'd love to have you. Gary, that's actually an interesting topic to me. If you want to call in and chat about it live on the show, I would love to talk about it. I think most of these people don't realize we live in representative government, which doesn't require the individual's consent. Exactly. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. We don't live in a pure democracy, right? You read about ancient Athenian pure democracy where every individual got a vote, and I mean, it was like it could be a mess. It could be a mess. I mean, and you can't. Frankly, it's one thing if you have a city state. And even back then in ancient Athens, every single person didn't get a vote. All the people in Athens, number one, women weren't allowed to vote. And at least the Roman Republic was only landholding males. So even back then, your purest form of democracy, it was likely only landholding males that could vote. And it was still a mess. They still couldn't make decisions. It went back and forth all the time. So, the shift in the history of democracy, the shift to a representative democracy is that, a representative democracy can still function. A pure democracy where people vote on every single decision is impossible in practice. The way some of the Moors will call the police when confronted by other police. Yeah, I've seen a couple of those videos. I mean, it's hilarious. Honestly, the thing that probably irks me the most is the way that they talk about lawyers, saying that lawyers are part of the crown, et cetera, et cetera. And the funniest thing about that is a lot of times these guys, they get public defenders or private criminal defense attorneys, and that person's only trying to help them. They're only trying to help them. And they're rejecting that help and assistance. And they probably sit in jail because of it. We're about 12 minutes in. I have a drink here. We're going to do the same time sip at 15 minutes. So if everybody, if you don't have a drink now, you got 3 minutes. Go run, grab a drink. We'll do the same time sip. I'm going to go for about an hour tonight. I'm pretty tired today. I know I say that all the time. I wish I could do my live shows at noon when I have a lot of energy. I'm a morning person. So a yoo-hoo. Now we're talking, Gary. Now we're talking. Do you have the little boxes? I mean, they're too good. Bob, you know what I'm drinking, man. If you watch my show, you know what I'm drinking. I'm not drinking beer. I'll tell you that. I know everybody wants me to do. I don't drink a lot of alcohol. I'm sorry. I'm not a big alcohol drinker. Da, 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 da. Gary, call in and talk to me about the Casey Anthony. Seriously, if you want the cans, okay, fair enough. They're good. It's good out of the cans too. If you want to call in and talk, I mean, I'm telling you, Gary, you should call in. Ba, 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 bum. Dun, 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 dun. Dun, 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 dun. I'd just be interested to hear what it was like to go to the trial. I was in law school during that trial, and there was some discussion of it. It wasn't the biggest issue. Hello, Joe Pometto here, Common Sense Academy.
Hey, Joe, it's Gary.
Gary, how you doing?
I'm doing good. Having a sip of my yoo-hoo in a second when you're ready.
Okay, we got 15 seconds, so let's do a little countdown here. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. It tastes better when you sip together. Everyone, I got my favorite, the Diet Coke, and let's do same time sip. All right. It's always better that way. Hang up, Joe. It's a bill collector. Ed called you a bill collector, Gary.
No, I'm calling because I don't believe in the government.
Wait, you don't work for the IRS? Come on. Okay, so tell me about the Casey Anthony trial. Did you go into the courthouse?
Yeah, I went a couple of times. I got on the lottery. You know, they had a lottery. You couldn't just walk in. It got so crazy. And I was able to get in a few times. And, you know, it was just sad. You know, I think it was a real travesty. She got away with murder. The jury, I think they wanted to convict her, but it seems they needed a picture of her doing it, you know, a photograph of her doing it in order to convict her. Circumstantial evidence just wasn't enough, and there was just so much of that. It was ridiculous.
Shoot, can you guys hear? I'm sorry. Hang on a second, Gary. I do have some questions. Let me try to set my speak. Dang, you know, that's about as good as I can get, everyone. I mean, can you hear it, or is it not worth it? Because you can hear Gary. John, you got a break still. Okay. Sorry, everyone. I still want to talk to Gary, so I know it's not great. Turn it up. Do something that you can to get the noise a little higher. I need to get a setup so it can be a little better. I don't have it. So you thought they didn't have enough evidence. So it was mostly circumstantial, wasn't it, Gary? They found the body, and it was what, in the woods outside of her house, correct?
Yeah, it was it's like a drainage canal behind her house that she used to go to with her friends to smoke and drink. She used to hang out there with her buddies. So that's how she knew of it. And unfortunately, a hurricane blew through here and flooded it out shortly after she must have dumped the body. And it sat submerged for long, and that's why nobody was able to find it until finally some guy went down there and was poking around, and he poked a garbage bag that was laying there, and her skull fell out. And then they blamed him. They tried to, say, oh, he must have had something to do with it. So it was just, it was just so much circumstantial evidence piled up against her, but the jury just wouldn't find her guilty based on circumstantial evidence. They wanted it signed and sealed, tied up with a bow, and, basically wanted her to admit that she did it, it seems.
Right. Gary, do you recall, did they ever establish the cause of death?
No, I think they said, because the body, was found so late and it was only skeletal remains with very little, skin because it was submerged and all that. They said they couldn't be sure, but there was some kind of signs inside of the skull that she had been strangled. They believe, the coroner said there was some kind of blood things inside the skull itself, which he believed showed strangulation and not death, like they said, by drowning.
Gotcha.
So they think that, she did something, either strangled it, or they found a piece of duct tape around her mouth, or all the way around her hair, and then it slipped out because there was no more skin, but there was duct tape glue on whatever skin was on, still attached to the duct tape. So, doesn't take a genius to figure out. She probably duct taped the kid's mouth shut, because they claim that she used to chloroform the kid when she wanted to go out partying.
Oh my God.
Would put her in a closet or somewhere, and they think that they chloroformed the kid, she put tape around her mouth, put her in her car or something, and she suffocated. And then she panicked, and then dumped the kid's body a couple of days later, because it had been sitting in her trunk, and the trunk stunk, her mother said, like death. She had all kinds of bounced dryer sheets in there, and she dumped the car at a used car lot, hoping somebody maybe would steal it, but nobody did. And when they found it, the car stunk. So the kid was probably laying in the trunk for a couple of days. She finally was able to dump it in that woods when no one was looking, and lied about it until she finally got caught. When the news came over the air, she was in jail and said the body had been found. She probably, crapped herself.
I'm sure.
She realized, oh my God, they found the body. Now what am I going to do? And then she lied the whole time about not knowing where it was.
Well, let me ask you, Gary, did they get evidence at the trial that she had chloroformed the child previously?
No, that was just
their theory.
I don't think it was ever brought up. It was just really what was said.
Gotcha.
By talking heads on TV and friends and things like that, but they couldn't prove it. But it just was a pretty good thought that that's how it happened. That somehow she drugged the kid or something, trying because she wanted to go out partying. She didn't want to have a baby.
Right.
And the parents couldn't take care of it all the time. They said they made her take care of that baby. They weren't going to coddle her. So that's what they think happened. And she just panicked. And then of course the mother and the father stuck up for her. They blamed it on the father. That he was the one that let the kid drown. He wasn't watching the baby. He's the one that dumped the kid's body. So
I'll tell you, in my experience, and I haven't done that many trials, but I've done several. What juries want these days is and this is probably a product of like CSI and NCIS. Like you said, they want a video, they want the smoking gun, or they want some forensic evidence to tie it directly to the death. And if the prosecution doesn't have that stuff, it can really be an uphill battle. It really can be. And it sounds like that's what happened in this case.
Yeah, had the guy, I think it was a cable installer, had he found the body before the hurricane came and washed out it might have been a totally different case.
Sure.
Since he found it after, there was nothing they could work with. I just keep saying, whenever I talk about it anyway, I said, if I was a juror and I knew she was guilty, but no one else was willing to convict her, I would have hung the jury.
Right.
And let the prosecution try the case again. And by that time, they would have had all the stuff that they didn't find out until halfway or towards the end. And they were able to disprove what the mother was saying. If they were able to have a second shot at her, I'm sure they would have been able to convict her. But of course, they found her not guilty, and you can't retry the case. So
no,
boom, free to get away with it, write her books and all that. And there's no civil case to be had because her parents aren't going to sue her for loss of their grandchild, and who else? She's the mother, so who's going to sue her? So,
Sure.
Maybe the guy that she tried to accuse, or the woman that she accused of originally being the nanny, and she's the one that stole the kid. But her case fell apart too. It never came through. So.
Let me ask you, Gary. Hello, Taze, and I want to say I want to give a shout out to Ed. Thank you, Ed, for the super chat. I still got to do some episodes on the Second Amendment that I haven't done, but those are coming. I got a lot to say on it. Gary, I've never been to, so I've seen some some high profile trials in Pittsburgh, right? But nothing like the level of Casey Anthony. So you said you had to there was a lottery to get in. How did that work?
There was just a limited amount of seats in the courtroom. Mm-hmm. Even it's not a huge courtroom. It's probably the largest that they have, because the judge that was presiding over it was the head judge of that court. So it was just a limited amount of seats. So they would have to get thousands of people that wanted to come in to watch. So they would actually have a lottery of people. If they chose your number, you would be able to go in and sit. And then if you didn't come back after lunch, if you didn't come back at a certain time, your seat would go to the next person.
Okay.
In the lottery.
Now, was everybody behaved in the courtroom, like all the spectators?
the days that I was there, at least, there was nobody shouting. It wasn't like a sovereign citizen trial where the teams are going nuts. People, it was pretty reverent. I mean, nobody. It was. I think more of the shouting was, like I said, the protesters out on the street were the ones really doing the shouting and yelling. But they had them in prescribed areas where they couldn't just walk along the front of the building. They had sections of the sidewalk for people that were protesting for her and against her, and they were separated. And otherwise, it was pretty quiet. It was just a lot of people were fighting outside the courtroom more than inside.
Interesting.
It was a very, very heated subject of a baby dying.
Yeah. What was your opinion of the judge? I can't remember who the judge was. Was it a male or a female?
It was. I think if I remember his name was Belvin Perry, I believe. He's very smart, and he tried to keep order. The defense lawyer kept on pretending he didn't know anything. He kept on trying to ask questions he knew he couldn't ask, but he would try to ask them. I'm sure that maybe you occasionally by accident, but he just kept on doing things and trying to ring a bell that he knew the prosecutors couldn't unring, and he did that quite often. And the judge would have to admonish him quite a few times on how not to lead a witness and things of that nature. But in the end, his shenanigans won out because he thoroughly confused, I guess, the jurors to the point where they just didn't know what they should do. And to listen to the judge's instructions, it was pretty clear what they should have done. And when I believe, just looking at the judge's face when the verdict came back, I think if he could have, he would have set aside that jury's
decision
and convicted her. But I just don't think he was ready to or able to do it. I don't know what the legality is of that, but I know judges can.
They can
decide a jury's verdict, and he seemed to really be of the opinion that she was guilty. I think even afterwards he said so in interviews. That he believed she was guilty, and but he wasn't willing to set aside.
It can be, Gary. It's extremely rare. It actually happened here in Pittsburgh a couple of months ago with this one judge who I actually have a lot of respect for him because he's a very independent thinker. And it doesn't, I would say he's probably defense friendly overall, but that's not always the case. If you're guilty, if you're convicted in his courtroom, it's not going to be a good day for you. But he overturned a jury verdict, essentially on the basis that the prosecution just didn't present enough evidence. And what you said about the defense attorney is that can be a defense strategy. The defense strategy can be to confuse the jury. And it's up to the prosecution to sort of slice through that confusion. Sometimes it's easier said than done. However, I don't approve. I don't, like you said, when they try, when defense attorneys or prosecutors try to ring a bell that can't be unrung, I don't like that. I don't think that's a good thing. I don't think that's an ethical strategy. That's up to the judge. Now, judges like to give attorneys leeway to do their cases. So, they admonish them or they do this and that. They don't always like to, take more drastic measures. I mean, removing the attorney, calling a mistrial, et cetera, et cetera. So this judge was probably just really trying to play it safe. It's unfortunate that he would do those things, but confusion can be a defense strategy. Very interesting. I will say, do you have Netflix, Gary?
I do.
Have you watched The Staircase?
No, I have not.
I can't remember his name. He was a famous author in Durham, North Carolina, and he was accused of murdering his wife. And basically what happens is he calls the police one day and he says that his wife fell, and they come into the house and his wife is at the bottom of a staircase and there's blood all over the wall and all over the area. Okay. And he says she fell, but it looked like a gruesome murder, like he bludgeoned her to death. You got a question? Let me finish this real quick. Anyway, that trial was, I wouldn't say it was similar to Casey Anthony because it didn't have the same emotions involving a baby, etc. But the prosecution's case was almost entirely circumstantial. And their theory was that he used a poker that was, and they didn't have well, actually the poker was missing. Okay. So their theory was that this guy had taken a poker from his fireplace and bludgeoned her over the head with it. Okay. But they didn't have a murder weapon. They had no evidence except for the blood splashes. Right. And he was convicted. He was convicted of homicide. Now, the judge made a ruling in the case that caused it to be overturned, I think, about 10 years later. So he ended up doing 10 years in prison, and then he got out. And they chose not to retry him. So when he was granted his appeal, the prosecution could have put him on trial again, and they basically chose not to at that point in time. So the thing about a trial sometimes is, it's a one-shot thing. Like a different jury, like you said, if you were on the jury, a different jury may have gone a different way. Who knows?
Yeah, well, there was people on that jury who they interviewed after who said, well, I thought she was guilty, but they just didn't have enough proof. And
right.
She said, that we needed more proof than just circumstantial proof. So I just don't know what else they really wanted, but yeah, like I said, it happens. And unfortunately, the judge didn't exercise that option to overturn the verdict. And she's, out clubbing and living a life while her kid is, buried somewhere.
Right. Very, yeah, extremely tragic.
And there was also another, I remember back, that'd be about 20 years ago or more, where there was a British nanny who was convicted of secondary murder, and the judge overturned the verdict, saying that he believes that, the jurors were just frustrated at the girl and didn't like her, and that's why they convicted her. So he overturned the conviction. So,
yeah, you're usually going to see, Gary, like if a jury goes not guilty, you're almost never going to see a judge overturn it. But a guilty verdict may get overturned. And there's a reason for that in the law. I'll be honest with you, I don't know it because it's extremely rare and I've never encountered the situation where I thought it applied. So usually that's the way it goes, is when a jury convicts, a judge may overturn a conviction. As far as a not guilty verdict, it's going to be extremely rare. I'm not even sure judges can do it in that. I'm actually not sure. We'll have to look into that.
That's the thing I'd be questioning is if he could have done it, would he have done it? Would have been nice.
Sure. Gary, you had a question from Kelly, or from Kay Jackson. I'm sorry. Did you go to the site where the baby was found?
I personally didn't go, but my sister went and she took photos of the area and was able to actually get down and access it. So it was just maybe 50 yards away from their house, the Anthony's house, where the entrance to this thing was. So, and as I said, her friends had said that that's where they used to hang out and go smoke and drink beers. So that's how she knew where it was, and maybe a perfect place to her to ditch the kid. Maybe she planned on going back to move it after. She just put it there quickly, and then the hurricane came and she couldn't get to it. But I think what would have happened was she went there, put it there temporarily, and probably meant to move it at some point, not leave it so close to our house, which would have been crazy because they had all kinds of out-of-state groups coming in, like Texas search people that came in with dogs and horses, and they were scanning the woods, and they would have found it eventually, I'm sure, had it not been flooded out. But again, they didn't get to it quick enough before the hurricane, and a lot of evidence was lost, obviously.
Gary, was the jury, do you remember the jury composition, Gary? Was it like half male, half female?
It was pretty mixed, but the thing was, the jury wasn't from Orange County, Orlando. They had to go outside to another county to select the jury because they felt that a jury picked from people in Orlando would have been so biased against her because of the coverage. So they went to, I don't know if it was Polk County or just a neighboring county that they went to. And it was, a good mix of people. It just, maybe just, like I said, people who, they claim when you watch jury selection, when they televise that, everyone that thinks, I never heard of this case. I never heard of it. Meanwhile, it's been on Florida. It was on Florida TV day and night. And all these people saying, I never heard of it. I don't know anything about this case.
It was on, yeah, I mean, I'm up here in Pittsburgh. It was on cable news every night. I mean, the whole country heard of it.
Yeah, before they went to jury selection, they had months of her in jail lying about whether, if there was anything, months before they even started jury selection. So anyone who had a TV or a newspaper knew about this trial, but all these people said they didn't. So I think, no matter where if you would have just picked it from Orlando people, you would have got the same kind of people saying, I never heard of the trial, just maybe to get on the jury, just to say I was on the Casey Anthony jury. But
yeah, who
go out of state just they wanted to be fair, and she said, she won't get a fair trial with the Orlando jury.
Yeah.
I might have been picked. I might have gotten a ticket.
Where do you live? Where do you live, Gary? You're Orlando?
Yeah, I lived in Orlando at the time.
Okay.
So I might have been picked for it if I had jury duty.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's a fascinating I know that's one of the last trials I remember that I was actually sort of following. Like, I don't follow them that closely on TV. I kind of like to read about them after the fact. That was one of the biggest ones that I feel like that's the last really big one that this country's had. I don't know. I know there's been a few other ones. They picked the jury. So I live in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I'm sure most of you know, but Pittsburgh's all the way on the western side of the state near Ohio, and Philadelphia is obviously on the other side near the East Coast, New York City. The Cosby jury was selected from the Pittsburgh County, from the Western PA area. So it was a similar situation, right? They went outside of Philly, okay? They went outside of Philadelphia. I'm sure the media there covered it more, but the Cosby trial was national news, okay? And it was still covered pretty heavily here in Pittsburgh, probably more so than some of the other states because it was so close by other cities. So it was, it's in a situation like that with the news is the jury pool is basically, it's spoiled no matter what.
Well, unless the jury pool came from under a rock. They won't know Bill Cosby or even Casey Anthony. I just don't think it's necessary to go out of state to pick a jury, but or even in state, but to a different county. Just being the way it is now with TV, it's impossible to get on tainted jury.
Absolutely.
You find people that have been like in prison without TV or something.
Right.
We'll have all prisoners, people in solitary confinement on juries.
Right. I was about to say you could go to Canada, but then again, even people in Canada and other countries probably heard of it. So,
Yeah.
not that that's a good option anyway. But All right, Gary, thank you for calling in. I'd love to have you call in again. I'm going to free up the phone lines in case somebody else wants to call in, or just so we can chat about some other topics. But I really appreciate you calling in and being a fan and joining me on these live chats.
Oh, yeah, anytime.
All right. Thank you for your insight, Gary. I found it interesting. I've never really heard from someone who's been at, one of the major trials. So thank you.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I'll talk to you in chat.
All right. Sounds good, Gary. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.
Hey, everybody. Sorry if you couldn't hear Gary too well, but he went to the Casey Anthony trial, and I just found it interesting because again, I've never attended a large trial like that. And he was saying that there was a lottery and that's how he was selected. He said that for the most part, all the spectators were well behaved. I just think it'd be really interesting to go and see a trial like that. I've been to some in Pittsburgh where it's packed because it's covered by the local news. But I haven't been to any, that was just a national sort of phenomenon. We don't have that many trials like that, probably one every couple of years. So thank you, Gary, for stopping in. I really enjoyed the insight you gave me into that and your opinion here and everything about it. If anybody else wants to call in and chat about a particular topic, I was going to ask Gary if any sovereign citizens stood up during the trial and put their 2 cents in. But he told me early on that is not what occurred. So that would be something else. I actually I've seen sovereign citizens in court. And, sometimes watching some of these people who just choose to go without an attorney, even if they're not sovereign citizens, they just don't want to go with an attorney. And it's just wild. I mean, it's just wild. I watched a case where the blah, 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 blah. Watched a case where the defendant was accused of rape / sexual assault. And the women are up there testifying against him. And because he's self-represented, okay, he's cross-examining them. It was just so awkward. I mean, and, imagine being cross-examined by someone who committed a violent crime against you. It was really wild. And that's just, that's why we have attorneys, so we can avoid those sorts of situations. But, sometimes they are unavoidable. As far as I know, everyone, as far as I know, jury nullification is legal. It happens. I swear I watched a documentary where a gentleman during a publicized trial where his child was raped and killed. A child was raped and killed. The father shot the defendant outside of the courthouse, and he went on trial, and the jury found him not guilty when the evidence was overwhelmingly in favor of guilty. He's guilty, but jury votes not guilty. Can it go the other way? That wouldn't be jury nullification, Taze, but yeah, I mean, you could certainly have a case where there's almost no evidence, but that's actually the situation. I know you came in late. So yeah, jury nullification is where the evidence is overwhelmingly in favor of conviction and the jury says no regardless. Now you're asking someone who is guilty, but jury votes not guilty. Can it go the other way? What? So what me and Gary were talking about was sometimes a person is convicted on very little evidence, and the judge then takes the conviction out of the hands of a jury. And that's one of the roles that a judge has, is to protect someone from being convicted when there just isn't enough evidence to convict that person. As far as, opposite. Guilty, jury goes guilty. I think Robert Blake, whose jury votes not guilty. Jury votes guilty and the person's innocent, then the judge is the only thing standing in the way of a permanent conviction and or an appeal for some other legal reason. I love how auditors say how they're going to sue. They realize lawsuits are really expensive. Right, Bob. See, the thing is, yeah, and that's why, a lot of jurisdictions are starting to prosecute the sovereign citizens for their paper terrorism, because they're filing frivolous lawsuits just to clog up the system and make other parties pay for attorneys. The truth of a lawsuit is, if you do it on your own, ultimately what lawsuits really take is time. That's what you're paying. You're paying for your lawyer's time, most of the cost, not all the cost. Lawsuits are time consuming. It takes a lot of freaking time. I think Robert Blake was jury nullification. I think that could happen to a judge, but the judge would probably give judgment notwithstanding the verdict. Yeah. Exactly. I mean, so a jury can acquit someone when the evidence is overwhelming for guilt, and a judge can acquit someone when a jury has found someone guilty with not enough evidence. The jury, Bob, yeah, jury votes not guilty regardless of the evidence to show guilt. Sounds like the impeachment trial. D-Gen, you ever heard from Devin Bay? Eric Brandt was whining about unjust conviction. I asked him, how do you like it now? Well, he'll go to a jury and he can make his argument for jury nullification. I think Robert Blake was found not guilty because the victim was so detestable. That can happen. An honest bard, how are you? Thank you for stopping in. Arcadia, thank you for dropping by. Taze, I'm glad you made it. Diane, I know you can't talk, but I'm glad you're here. And sorry you're not feeling well. I'm trying to think. So, okay, we have a couple of scenarios here. Evidence says convict, but the jury doesn't. That would be jury nullification. Evidence says don't convict, but the jury convicts. That would be when a judge pulls it out of their hands. And I believe that would be called something along the lines of judgment notwithstanding a verdict. Now, let's say, well, that pretty much covers it. But good night, Kelly. Good night. I know it's late and it's a Tuesday, but I promise to do some more live shows. I'm tired too. I'm only going to go for about another 10 to 20 minutes. Does anybody want to call in or have a specific topic to talk about? I think everybody here is aware. I have another, I started another channel called Joe the Lawyer. Okay. And, these two, they sort of overlap, but they kind of don't. And the main difference is that the content that I'm going to churn out on this show is going to be, 5 to 10 to 15 to 20-minute videos on sovereign citizens, First Amendment auditors. I want to get more into the First Amendment stuff and just maybe randomly strange news. Shout us out at that other lawyer's channel. I should have, Taze. I'm sorry. Next time I will. Oh, I couldn't see his chat. That's what I wanted to say is I couldn't really see the live chat because we were in Hangouts and Google Hangouts has its own format. So I was wondering if you guys were there. So, thank you for coming by, Taze. And I did want to do shout outs, but I couldn't see the live chat. So I didn't know who was there and who wasn't there. That's why. The travel bans, are they constitutionally sound? Bob, thank you for the super chat. I'm going to give you the best answer that I can with the information I have before me. There was a famous case post World War II, during World War II, I think it was either during or right after, on the Japanese internment camps. Perhaps you're familiar with them, where President Eisenhower, President Roosevelt put Japanese citizens into internment camps during the war, and even some I believe even some Germans were put into camps, maybe even some Italians. But the Japanese obviously were interned. And there was a constitutional challenge to that based on essentially the argument was that the president acted unconstitutionally without the consent of Congress. Okay. And the Supreme Court said that the executive branch has certain powers when it comes to national security to act in ways that, you know, may otherwise be deemed in violation of constitutional rights. Okay, that's a very famous case. I can't remember what it is. Anybody could Google it right away. The travel ban, Trump's travel ban on the Muslim countries, my understanding is, you know, if you remember what happened is he instituted the travel ban through executive decision without Congress passing a law and him signing it into law. So Trump passes the travel ban through an executive order. There's a challenge to it. A federal judge put an injunction on it, and it went to the United States Supreme Court. And the Supremes held under similar reasoning to the allowance of the Japanese internment camps that the executive could act in this way when national security was at stake, as long as they could articulate essentially compelling reasons why such a policy was sound and was serving the purpose of national security. That's what allowed him to act without a law passed by Congress in that area. Now, there's other ways that the travel ban could be challenged, such as an infringement on some of the rights that are guaranteed through the Bill of Rights or the 14th Amendment, some of the personal rights that are protected in the Constitution, such as due process, equal protection, etc. However, again, national security and compelling reasons, and this is actually maybe a bit scary because it grants a lot of power to the executive branch. So that is as close of an answer that I can give you without reading the case law and getting into it. I had someone ask me what's a hung jury. So jury decisions in criminal cases have to be unanimous. So if you have 12 jurors, everybody on that has to vote for acquittal or for conviction. When one or multiple people refuse to vote the way of the majority, you have a hung jury. Okay, so you could have 11 people who say convict and one person, nope, not going to do it, not going to vote that way. Okay, and the judge may send the messages and might hold them in there to try to get them to make a decision. But if that person's held out, then that jury is hung, and it doesn't mean the case goes away, but you have to have a new trial. Generally, that's viewed as positive for defense, because if the defense strategy can be to grind down the prosecution, grind them down. And it's not always easy for the prosecution to bring all their witnesses in over and over again and do multiple trials over and over again. So if you get a hung jury, the prosecutor may come back and give you a good offer because they don't have the resources or the time or the ability to go through a trial again. So that's what a hung jury is. When the jury cannot reach a unanimous decision, it becomes hung, and essentially the trial gets canceled. I'm going to look this up. I can give you probably a good answer on the travel ban because I have a good understanding of Trump versus Hawaii. Court delivered in a 5-4 split along upheld the validity of the travel ban within the president's power. Hawaii, so several states, Trump passed the travel ban by a presidential proclamation, which is an executive order, which presidents can do as long as it's within their constitutional power, and they would have the force of law. And the court repudiated the infamous decision of Korematsu versus United States, justified the president's powers to establish internment camps, and remanded the case. The decision of the court applied rational basis review and emphasized deference to the executive branch. Likelihood of success on the merits. Upheld is within the president's power. Decision lifted the current injunction. The main issue was whether the travel ban established or violated the establishment clause, which prohibits the government from making law respecting any establishment of religion or the free exercise of. The plaintiffs had standing. Plaintiffs argued it did. If religion is targeted intentionally, then strict scrutiny applies. Part of the majority's decision referenced Korematsu. The court. Okay, so it sounds, I'm going to give you one more. Trump would never go outside of his allocated power. So one more thing. Basically what the issue with the travel ban, the way that it was attacked, and there may have been other bases of attack, but the ones that made it Supreme Court was whether it was a violation of the Establishment Clause, which guarantees freedom of religion, because Trump's ban targeted Muslim countries. And if you remember, they also used Trump's language talking about Muslims, okay, to try to beat him in this, saying he was targeting the Muslim religion. Well, the court held that it was that this, not to get too deep into the weeds, but the Supreme Court will apply different levels of review. There's a level of review called strict scrutiny. And if the court applies strict scrutiny, they strike a statute down unless there's a compelling reason. If they apply rational basis review, all that's needed is any rational basis for the law that the president passed. That's what the judge applied here, was a rational basis review, okay? And they found that concluded the language, the immigration was clear in giving the president broad authority to suspend the entry of non-citizens. The limits he put were tailored to protect American interests. Trump acted within his powers, according to Roberts. Entry in law. Roberts pointed out, even though 5 of the 7 nations have a Muslim majority, that fact alone does not support an inference of religious hostility, given that policy covers just 8% of the world's Muslim population and is limited to countries that were previously designated by Congress as posing national security risks. And that's one of the things that the travel ban did, is it only targeted countries that the United States had deemed as having terrorist threats. Okay. So hi, Lynn. Thank you. So all the Supreme, basically all the Constitution said was, he needed a rational basis and he needed to not target a religion. And Justice Roberts and the majority of the Supreme Court said that Trump met that standard. He had a rational basis to protect national security interests, and that it didn't solely target religion. There were other reasons for it. Therefore, the travel ban was ultimately upheld. How do federal judges do injunctions on orders? Bob, that's a good question. But, I don't practice enough federal law or even constitutional law, frankly, to know exactly how they do it on an order. However, the court delivered. I can give you some clarification here. On Trump's sign, the Supreme Court allowed the travel ban. Okay, Fourth Circuit on October 10th, Supreme Court did so with regard to the Fourth Circuit case. I believe that Fourth Circuit is a federal district located in Richmond, Virginia, over Okay, so I don't actually. So more or less, what happened is, the president signed an executive order. Generally, for that to go through the court system, it's going to go through the Fourth Circuit and then up to the Supreme Court. So there's a local district judge in Washington, D.C., then the Fourth Circuit, which is the appeals court, and then you have the Supreme Court. So if there's a constitutional challenge, it can come from any of the federal courts. But executive orders, I believe it can come from any of the federal courts. But a federal judge, believe it or not, a federal district judge can make a decision overriding an executive order of the president. Okay. And then that decision has to work its way up to the Supreme Court. That's what happened here. Trump passed the travel ban, and a local United States district judge, okay, decided the constitutionality of it. He didn't say that it wasn't unconstitutional, but he said the travel ban should not be put into effect until the constitutionality of it can be decided and it can go up through the courts. So a federal judge has jurisdiction over constitutional issues. Therefore, they can issue an injunction in an order as long as you have two parties with proper standing, okay, who bring that issue into the courts. I don't know if that answered your question, and I don't know the exact language of an order like that. Honestly, it's probably not that complicated, but what an injunction does more or less is it holds off the implementation of a law until another issue can be worked out. So it's only temporary. An injunction is generally temporary until the legality of the issue can be decided. And that's what happened with Trump's travel ban, because he passed it in like 2017, and it didn't work its way to the Supreme Court until a year later. Yeah, president's power over foreign affairs. Apparently, there's also particular statute that grants a president certain powers, but the Constitution has generally been interpreted to grant the president broad powers, extremely broad powers when it comes to foreign affairs. The travel ban and even the Japanese internment during World War II are interesting because they actually have wide domestic effects. Especially that internment. I mean, they literally put American citizens into camps. So when it comes to national security, a thing you want to understand about the Constitution is, again, the president has broad powers. Now, if Congress specifically, here's the thing though about executive orders, this is good to understand, is, if Trump put in that travel ban, if Congress could write a law overriding the travel ban. Congress can always override pretty much anything the president does. Okay. However, with a divided Congress, you're not going to see that happen. And the president would have the power to veto. So you would need a 3/4 majority in the Senate, and I believe in the House and the Senate, to override the president's veto. So Trump passed a travel ban. Congress says no. Trump vetoes Congress's law that says no. Congress would need the 3/4 majority to override that veto, which would have been impossible in this situation. So instead, it just worked its way up to the Supreme Court. Bob, I hope that gave you a better understanding. That's an issue I'll look into a little bit more for you when it comes to injunctions. Maybe in the future, listen, I'm coming on tomorrow at 8 o'clock. If there's anything you want me to discuss and prepare, drop it in my comments or send me an email. But when I make a community post, drop it in that community post and I'll look it up beforehand. Trump's authority for travel ban with president's power over foreign affairs. More or less, yes. Hawaii's challenge. They challenged it. They challenged it under 8 base. They challenged it under 8 bases. You know, it's interesting in that decision. It says here, Justice Robert, the language. So there was a United States statute, federal law. This is a federal law passed by Congress, approved by the president, Immigration and Nationality Act, which gives the president broad authority to suspend the entry of non-citizens in the country. So the important thing to understand there is that Donald Trump was not acting without some sort of statutory authority, right? So some situations like the internment camps, okay, the president just did something without citing specific legal authority. Here, there's a law in place that regulates immigration and grants the president specific powers to do things in regards to immigration. Off-topic question, Joe. You play any games? I don't. Yeah, I don't really game, honest Bard. So, you know, the answer to that question is no. I like to play cards. I played a lot of video games when I was younger. You know, I'm such a nerd. The things that I like to do, honestly, look at this, is I like to read, and I like to I'll watch a lot of YouTube, and I read legal shit, and you know, that's what I do with a lot of my free time, and I spend time with my family, and I hang out with my friends. So I'm not a big gamer. I got, you know, there's a couple of games I used to get into in the past. I used to love fighting games. But I don't really get into gaming anymore. Not that I have anything against it. I have a lot of friends who love the game. It's just not my thing. I wish I used to drink a lot of beer days. I really, I'm like a bookworm. I mean, I read. I love to read. I showed my aunt and she fangirled. It made her happy. People care enough. So here's the thing. I started that. Whoops, there goes my sign. I started that. I was going to do a whole history on the Constitution. We'll go with that. At one point in time, I read the majority of this book back in law school. And I really, you know, a thing that fascinates me, I'll nerd out. Like I told you guys, I read. I'm really nerd. I'm a big history nerd. And well, Bob, a suit was filed in court. A suit was filed. So the judge didn't act without a lawsuit. Several states filed lawsuits against it right away. So, you know, the injunction came with a lawsuit filed. But yeah, I'm a big fan of I like the concept of democracy, republicanism, and constitutionalism, and literally like the history of the world. And if you go back, I didn't even notice sign and change until it went crooked. Yeah, new sign, and nobody, listen, people, everybody, look, I know that these bookshelves are like, they look a little crooked, but trust me, they're like in pretty good shape and they're sturdy. I get comments on that all the time, and I haven't received a single comment on the new sign, and it's been a couple of videos so far. You guys missed the JPL sign. That's okay. It's going to be, when I go live on Joe the Lawyer, you're going to have it. I can't remember what I'm talking about. But yeah, I wanted to do a whole series on the development of constitutionalism all the way to the present day, because look, everybody has an understanding of the Constitution, and it's good. You know, we learn about it in school, and I love to see citizens on both sides of the aisle argue about the Constitution. But I think there's a lot that gets left out. It's really, really complicated. And I don't know if complicated is the right word. I wouldn't say complex. I think it's within anybody's grasp to understand constitutional interpretation and the history of the Constitution, how it works in relation to the Supreme Court. It's within everyone's grasp to understand. There's just a lot of information. And you kind of have to have a historical perspective that brings you to the modern time. And then when you see things unravel, like the travel ban, you'll say, this is what's happening. So, I wanted to bring it back because I like constitutionalism. The ancient Athenians and the Roman Republic, they operated in a constitutional system, even though they didn't have a written constitution. And then later on in the Middle Ages, you have really in Britain, in Great Britain and in England, you have the development of a sort of primeval constitutional system based on the fact that the local barons took power from the king and created a parliament. And then there was this dynamic between the king and parliament that created a tradition of constitutionalism within England itself. And that's kind of where the American system comes from. It's funny because at the time of the Revolution, and this was, no taxation without representation, Great Britain or the United Kingdom already had a constitutional system in place. They just didn't allow their colonies to play within that system. And so that's one of the reasons we had the Revolutionary War, right? No taxation without representation. Honestly, the British might have been able to avoid the war if they just allowed the colonies to have representatives in Parliament. Now, that might not have been practically something that could be done. How do you have a representative from somebody across the ocean and ease of communication, et cetera, et cetera. But from there, and then the United States, we win the Revolutionary War. First, you had the Articles of Confederation, which is a sovereign citizen thing. Then you have the Constitution, and the founders really, they focused on, obviously, I'd say 5 to 10 great thinkers like John Locke and Montesquieu and a couple other ones in putting the Constitution together. And it's just fascinating. And you really, to really understand why it works the way it does, you kind of need that historical context. And so that's what I was going to give. Didn't have a written constitution. How did they know they had one? Right, exactly, Taze. And that's the thing, is the theory of that constitutionalism. So the theory is that the idea is that constitutionalism doesn't actually require a written constitution. Constitutionalism can be a group of shared norms. So, for instance, and because I know a lot about Rome and the Roman Republic, well, they wrote down their practices, Taze, and there's historical recitations of what was done. Okay, but there was no one written constitution. So there wasn't like a 30-page book in ancient Rome that says this is your constitution, but what was done in practice was still recorded historically. Like, for instance, ancient Rome, they had a yearly census. This was done every year. So through that norm in practice, it gains a constitutional concept, okay, even though it wasn't written down. They had a designated number of senators, okay, and that was part of their constitution, even though it wasn't written down. It was literally just passed. Now, there might have been different writings, but it wasn't codified like our constitution is now. And the same is true of ancient Athens. Like, they had yearly elections. They had certain positions that were required by Athenian law. Same is true of Roman law. Like Roman law they had like two presidents. They were called consuls. Okay. And again, all of this wasn't written down, but it became a regular and accepted practice that was basically passed down through oral or mental knowledge. I mean, everyone in the chamber knew what the rules were, even if they weren't always written down. So you can have constitutionalism without a writing. So that was a lot. That was a lot. Who is bound by the Constitution? Is a limit on federal and state government. That's who's bound by the Constitution. Federal government and state government. Private citizens are not technically bound by the Constitution. I have a feeling I'm going to find an Athenian Constitution. If you do, it was written 500, if not 2,000 years after the fact. You won't find one. So the Constitution is a limit on the powers of government. That's the concept of constitutional. The Constitution limits the powers of the ruler. That's why you can have a constitution even in England, where they had a king and they had nobles and they had a parliament. The constitutional concepts limited the power of the king. Okay, it's a limit on the power of government. That's what a constitution is. That's the concept of constitutionalism. Well, Taze, write that bad boy and let's sell it, man. Let's make some money. I mean, can I do directly what my alleged representative does for me? If not, how are they my rep? Can I do directly what my alleged? Can you? No. So, a representative is just someone. The only direct input you have in what the representative does is that you choose who the representative is. Once the representative gets into the chamber, they can do what they want, right? They don't have fake power like an elector in the electoral college, who is essentially can be commanded what to do by the state. A representative in representative government has power to make whatever decision they want. I mean, you can vote someone in, they could run on an anti-abortion platform and then get into office and then just and then just go total pro-choice on you. There's nothing to stop that from happening legally. The power that you have over them is you can choose not to put them back into office. So the power is the voters have to hold them to what their campaign promises are. Okay, that's what's important in representative democracy. Well, one thing that's important in representative democracy. If the Constitution is a limit, does it ever apply? Absolutely, it applies all the time, and it limits the power of the government in countless numerous ways. They get in the chamber, but don't throw them in the chamber pot. Yeah, I mean, that's the idea. One of the problems that people have with representative democracy, and this is why everybody argues for term limits, is because, yeah, it's true. Once somebody gets in the first time, they have an advantage and it's easy for them to stay in. But the truth of the matter is that if the people, at any given time, the people in that district, they can pick a new representative every, for Congress, it's every 2 years. For a senator, it's every 6 years. For a state representative, it's every 2 years. For a state senator, I think they serve 4-year terms. You can put someone new every term, just like we do the president. I mean, the president does have term limits. The representatives don't. Perhaps, I mean, that's something worth talking about, whether there should be term limits on representatives. That's reasonable, but you can choose who you want. Boom, 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 boom. Term limits for Congress. Two terms, 6 years each is plenty enough time. Yeah, Gary, there's a very reasonable case for that. There's a very reasonable case. Sorry, I wasn't having a senior moment. Come on, guy. I had to respond to a text. I apologize. Look, there's, Mitch McConnell said, he said, we have term limits. They're called elections. I don't know. I think there's a good discussion to be had about term limits. I think that they may have their place. I think there's also something to be said for having senior statesmen in your government. And, some people say, let's throw them all out. And, at any given time, we look at the people in our Congress and we say, they're all bums. We want them all gone. But again, there may be something to be said for having somebody who's been a senator for 20, 25 years, especially when you're dealing with foreign powers. You're dealing with other individuals like kings or dictators who are in power forever. I think there's something nice maybe about having certain senators who've been in power for a really long time. It gives them certain weight and authority, especially on foreign policy. So I just think that's something to think about. The real problem is probably with voter apathy. I mean, here's the thing. If you want, I think there's a case to be made for, but I'm a defense attorney, so I'm going to make the counter argument here. You can vote these people out anytime. The people in that district can vote those people out at any time. If they're upset enough, and it occasionally happens. I mean, Eric Cantor was voted out. Tim Murphy was the congressman here in Western Pennsylvania for like 20 years. And he got Me Too'd. Okay. He got Me Too'd and he more or less got thrown out, but it was because he was going to lose. So it happens. Do I think maybe there should be some sort of term limits? Probably something. Maybe for senators, we should have something. I don't know if we have this. An age limit, something like an age limit, 75, something along those lines. Pennsylvania now has an age limit for common pleas court judges. So it's interesting. But we already had a lot of people sign out. I'm going to sign out for the night. Everybody, thanks for coming. I'm going to sign on tomorrow. So tune in tomorrow. And I'll be back. We're going to do another episode. Check out my show, Joe the Lawyer. Just put Joe the Lawyer into YouTube. If you guys haven't signed up, go ahead and sign up. I'm going to do my Second Amendment stuff on there, but it's coming. All right, everybody. Common Sense Academy. Thank you for all the super chats, Bob, Job. I truly appreciate it. First Amendment Ed. I appreciate it, Ed. Thank you very much. It helps a lot. Helps me dedicate time to this show. It really does. Peace out.